I'm sure. Wow, the stamina is great. This is no end for the thirst for the Dhamma, which is wonderful then. So we're going to carry on then. This is what Ajahn Brahmali always says in the monastery. He walks around the monastery, he looks at the monks and he sees what they're doing, and he always says, very good, carry on. It's a standard thing. Yeah. So now we're going to come to the next sutta, which is here called the subjects of regular reviewing. Yeah. So these are kind of regular practices that, according to the Buddha, we should all be doing. Yeah, so they are very similar to what we have seen already, many of these things. And so we'll see how much detail we will go into on this one. So this is found in the 𝐁𝐫𝐚𝐡𝐧 Nikaya, the numerical discourses, the fives, the fifth chapter. This is sutta number 57. And it begins as follows. The Buddha says, mendicants, a woman or a man, a layperson or a renunciate, should often review these 5 subjects. 5. So it starts off in an interesting way. Yeah, it's not very often you see this kind of introduction. Yeah, woman or a man, a layperson or a renunciate. In other words, everyone should do this kind of contemplation. Yeah, the only thing that should not do it is animals are not included, and zombies are not included, ghosts are not included, but basically everyone should do this. And I think this is true for many of the suttas. Yeah, they really mean everyone, and very often it says mendicants. Actually, what it says is monks. This is Ajahn Sujato's translation, mendicants, to make it a bit more inclusive. But even then, the lay people are kind of left out. Yeah, if you say mendicants, but very often everyone is actually included. That is because the way that the Pali works, it is always addressed to the most senior people present, and that will often be the monks. And that's why it is addressed in this way. But actually, it is about everyone. So you cannot escape. You are included as well. Yeah. So when the Buddha says, be kind, he also means everyone. You cannot kind of sneak in some bad intentions there, because you have to follow the same practice. Good, right? That's good. So yes, so that is the so we're going to look at these 5 subjects, and you will not be surprised that many of these are similar to what we have just looked at. So we saw in the previous sutta, the Buddha was talking about the things that he was reflecting on before his awakening, and now we will see that actually what we should reflect on is exactly the same things that he was reflecting on. So the first one, I'm liable to grow old. I'm not exempt from old age. A woman or a man, a layperson or a renunciate should often review this. Often, right? Maybe every day even. I'm kind of old age is kind of there, just waiting to come out. One of the ways I like to think about this is it's already inside of you. Yeah, old age is already there. It's already part of you. And so it's just kind of waiting to come out when the time is right. So that's kind of a nice way of thinking about you, that you're already this person. Yeah, it's already kind of there. And this is one of the nice things which also breaks down the barriers between people. You know, one of the nice things that we find in the suttas is this idea of not having superiority conceit, inferiority conceit, or equality conceit. And I say the main reason for that is because we're always changing. We're always conditioned in different ways. We're always moving from one thing to another one. And people often ask me, well, why are you a monk? Yeah, why on earth are you a monk? You were born in Norway. Norwegians don't normally become monks. What's wrong with you? And actually, they should really ask what's right with me, right? Is that what's wrong with me becoming a monk? Why am I a monk? And I always say, and you know the answer already, because I was a monk I think I was a monastic in a past life. But what is interesting about that, if I was a monastic in a past life, where would I have been a monastic? Probably somewhere in Asia, right? And that kind of, and maybe I was a nun in a past life. Who knows? It's really possible to know. But the moment you think of yourself like that in a past life, I was maybe a nun in Asia, not Sri Lanka, Taiwan, Thailand, somewhere here. It kind of, you think about yourself in a very different way here. And suddenly you think of yourself in, as a very different kind of person, belonging to a different culture, belonging maybe to a different gender, and all of these kind of things. And it opens up your ability to empathize and to sympathize with people who often we think of as different. And then you realize, actually, we're not that different after all. Yeah, all of these other people are inside of us. And they are inside of me right now. You have been there before, and unless you make an end of the round of rebirth, you will be there again in the future. And so what is inside of me? Well, all of these various cultures in the world, all the various races, the various genders, the various socioeconomic status, whether you're intelligent or stupid, whether you are handicapped or not, whether you have Down syndrome or not, all of these things are inside of us because we have been there before. And the moment you realize these things are already part of you, when you see someone who you think might be different from you because of whatever, because of all of these differences that we have, you look at that person differently, and you start to make a connection to that person because you start to know, actually, I have been there before. So wherever you travel in the world, whatever condition you see a person in, you see a beggar under a bridge, you see some wealthy person or whatever it might be from a different culture, you make a connection to that person, a direct human connection. That is where we can avoid all these differences that split us apart, which are the causes of wars and all of this violence and all these crazy things in our society. But this is the same thing with old age. Yeah, we think of old people as different from us, but no, we have been there before. We have been old in past lives. In this very life, old age is already inside of me, waiting to come out. Yeah, and so there isn't any real difference between us and the old person. You see yourself in that old person. And that moment you see yourself in that old person or any other person, you make a human connection. At that moment, it is possible to empathize and understand anyone in the world. We don't need all of this splitting apart that we have in our societies. There was an interesting study, there's a department at Berkeley University in the United States. Berkeley, one of the great, large, famous universities in the US. And they had a department of othering studies. And othering is this idea that we tend to make other people other than us, right? So, for example, when you go to war with a different country, the first thing you do is you consider the people in the other country, they're somehow a bit subhuman, they're not quite human, right? And that's why it's okay to kill them, because they're not Buddhists, right? They're not Buddhist and they're not really worth quite so much. Is that true? History is a bit like that, and you look at places like Sri Lanka, this is the sort of arguments that we use sometimes in the past for killing non-Buddhists, for example. Yeah, they're not, don't keep the 5 precepts, okay, they don't really count, they're not fully human because of that. And so there's a natural tendency in the human beings with other people, we make them different. And that othering is one of the main causes in our society for conflict, violence, war, and all the crazy kind of things that we do in our society. So we need to do the opposite. And in Buddhism, we have the tools for that opposite. Yeah, the tools are precisely because of rebirth, because we're always moving in this world from one society, from between all of these various stations in life, because we're always changing. All of these people are already inside of us. In the future, we will be reborn there. In this way, we can make a connection and we can reduce the sense of othering, including old age, as we see right here. Yeah, so you are, in a sense, already old. You know what it means to be old. You've been there before. So now you can kind of tap into that feeling again and see what it is like. Yeah, understand what it means. And knowing that actually getting old is not very pleasant, things failing. And again, it gives you the sense of urgency on the path because you understand that actually it is really problematic. So anyway, so you're not exempt from old age, yeah? And yeah. Actually, let me read these things out, and I'll come down to the next paragraph just below, because that is where the kind of the wisdom aspect comes in. I'm liable to get sick. I'm not exempt from sickness. I'm liable to die. I'm not exempt from death. I must be parted and separated from all I hold dear and beloved. I'm the owner of my deeds, the heir to my deeds. Deeds are my womb, my relative, and my refuge. I shall be heir to whatever deeds I do, whether good or bad. A woman or a man, a layperson or one or a renunciate should often review this. So these are the 5 subjects to be reviewed. So what happens when we review these subjects? And this is what happens. What is the advantage for a woman or a man, a layperson or renunciate, of often reviewing this? I am liable to grow old. I am not exempt from old age. There are sentient beings who, intoxicated with the vanity of youth, do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. Reviewing this subject often, they entirely give up the vanity of youth, or at least they reduce it. This is the advantage of a woman or a man, a layperson or renunciate, of often reviewing this. I am liable to grow old. I am not exempt from old age. Yeah, these are one of the many intoxications in life. You get intoxicated by being young. You feel strong, you feel healthy, you can do what you want, and you forget that there is a future. There is a future reality that often comes very, very quickly. And so by understanding that that reality is already there, already inside of you, waiting to come out, you kind of take away that intoxication with being young that can otherwise happen. Yeah, where you just indulge and you become stupid, and then when you become stupid, you do bad things by body, speech, and mind as a consequence. So intoxication is kind of interesting how the Buddha expands the idea of intoxication. Normally we think about alcohol, yeah, it's kind of one of the obvious cases of intoxication, or drugs maybe, yeah. But actually intoxication happens in so many different ways. Yeah, being young, we forget, anytime you forget about reality, you get kind of intoxicated. Intoxicated by the pleasures of the world, and this is another of the famous similes of the Buddha. Maybe we can talk about afterwards. Yeah, you just kind of enjoy the pleasures of the world. That kind of makes you intoxicated in a certain way. You forget about realities, and you just indulge in the worldly things. Yeah, your mind forgets about reality, forgets about what is right and wrong. That is really the idea of intoxication. So old age keeps you sane. Yeah, I'm going to get old. You look at yourself in the mirror, you see old age coming. Allow it to sink in, and your mind becomes clear. The mind kind of gets rid of the stupidity and the vanity and all of these kind of things. It's kind of weird. Yeah, it's actually nice. And that is how this works out. What is the advantage of often reviewing this? I'm liable to get sick. I'm not exempt from sickness. There are sentient beings who, drunk on the vanity of health, do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. Reviewing this subject often, they entirely give up the vanity of health, or at least they reduce it. This is the advantage of often reviewing this. I am liable to get sick. I am not exempt from sickness. Vanity of health, right? It's kind of the idea that I am healthy, when actually you are both healthy and sick pretty much all the time. The body is complicated, and it never is one thing or the other. It is always, yeah. So if you think you're one of those people who is always healthy, then you are always in for a surprise, because suddenly one day that health is gone and you are sick instead. It's vanity to think that you are a healthy kind of individual, because you don't know what's going to happen around the corner now. So you are ready now, and you understand that this is part and parcel of life, as we mentioned before. And your mind clears up. You don't become so intoxicated anymore with the body, because you know the downside. The five sense realm becomes less interesting, because that sense realm is corrupted at the core. Yeah, it is inherently problematic. It always has a downside to it. And as you as you live and enjoy that five sense realm, in the middle of that enjoyment, you become heedless, yeah? And then suddenly, bang, it crashes over you, and then you suffer because of the consequence of being heedless beforehand. And this is one of the problems of humanity. We become heedless so easily. We lose over kind of the understanding of the problem of life. Yeah, it reminds me of what happened in Europe during the Second World War. And the Second World War was it was bad everywhere around the world. It was bad in Singapore, everywhere, but it was really, really bad in Europe. Millions and millions of people died, and cities were completely flattened to the ground. There was nothing left. It was terrible. And after the Second World War, people were saying, never again. We don't want to go through these things again. Yeah, and because the memory was so strong of all the suffering and all the people dying, your family members being exterminated, and these kind of things. And then after the war, it was a very peaceful time in Europe. Yeah, there was very little crime. There was very little going on. It was a very kind of innocent kind of world. It was a bit like Singapore, yeah, the whole of Europe at that time. Yeah, always very peaceful, low crime rates, that kind of thing. Yeah, but Singapore society only lasts for so long. Yeah? Then it starts to deteriorate as well. Yeah, you feel very lucky that you're born in Singapore. But what about in 10 years' time? Is it going to be the same? Or is it going to be more like some more dodgy place? You don't know what's going to happen next. Yeah, it's so uncertain. And so this kind of leads to a sense of urgency. And then after a while in Europe, people start to forget about the Second World War. They say never again, but actually that is just another delusion, never again. Of course it's going to happen again, because then you forget about those realities. You forget about the horrors of war. Then you start going to war again, because this seems to be the human nature. We always go to war. Yeah, we are stupid in this way. And we become complacent because we forget the memory of those things. And one of the things that is very interesting about the five sense realm is that it is an inherently violent realm full of conflict. Yeah, it is always going to be like that. It has to be like that. That is kind of really off-putting when you think about it. And what that means, if you understand that the five sense realm is a realm of conflict, it means you want to withdraw into your own personal realm within, into your mind, into that refuge you have inside of yourself. The Buddha says very beautifully in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is the sutta of the Buddha's last days. Yeah, he's traveling to his final destination where he's going to pass away. And because it is the Buddha's last days, some of his most powerful teachings are found in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the greatest sutta of the Buddha's passing away. Yeah, because he's telling the monks, he's telling everyone about how to live after he's passed away. And one of the things he says there, when Venerable Ananda gets very, very upset, Venerable Ananda, of course, the Buddha's attendant, and he is really upset because he sees the Buddha getting sick. Yeah, the Buddha is really kind of in a bad state, about to pass away, getting very close. And Venerable Ananda says, "Oh, Venerable Sir, I'm losing my sense of direction. I can't remember the Dhamma anymore. Yeah, because I see the Buddha being in such a terrible state." And then the Buddha replies to Venerable Ananda and says, "But haven't I told you that everything that is dear and pleasing to you must become otherwise? You must become separated from that." This is what we have just seen, just now, 2 seconds ago, right? This is exactly the same thing we saw here. You must be parted and separated from all that is dear and beloved. That is exactly the same teaching. And so what is the answer? And the answer is, the Buddha says, then you should be a refuge unto yourself. The Dhamma should be your refuge. How are you a refuge unto yourself? How do you take the Dhamma as your refuge? By practicing the four Satipatthanas. What is the practice of the four Satipatthanas? Well, really, it is about things like mindfulness of breathing, where you close your eyes, you go within, you experience peace, joy, happiness, mindfulness, all of these qualities inside of you, and that is the refuge. because that is where you are no longer reliant on the external world. The external world doesn't matter anymore, yeah? Because there you are separated and you become strong within yourself and you're able to deal with things outside. That is the world, the one world where we are liberated from the five senses. We're liberated from our dependency on what happens outside. And that is why that is the real refuge. So it's a beautiful idea. We go inside of ourselves. That is the refuge from the world. Yeah? So this is what happens. And so this is what we want to do as well. When we see the complacency in the world, we get complacent. This is the danger of living in a kind of very peaceful society like Singapore, yeah, or Europe after the Second World War. It's easy to get complacent and forget that actually things will change. You can see people get complacent when they start complaining about small little things. Yeah, is that what people do in Singapore? They complain about the small things become big things. Usually that's the way it is, right? When things are going well. But actually, the bigger reality is always there behind, and always waiting to come out and scare us and give us a shock. So this is kind of the idea here, right? And this is the idea that behind these kind of things and these, where we ultimately want to find this refuge when we understand the troubles in that five sense world. Five sense world is always, excuse me, it's full of coughing. This is the downside of the five sense world. Sickness, right, is right there in your face. Actually, I'm not really sick. I'm just coughing. I don't call that sickness. It's just whatever. So coming back to the simile I was talking about, right, that the five sense world is inherently full of conflict and violence. That's where I started out. This is found in one of the suttas called the Potalya Sutta, which I usually read out on every retreat. I haven't got it here, but I will just tell you some of the things there. Many of you will have heard it many times before, and now you're going to hear it again. So I hope you're okay with that. And in that sutta, they're making this particular case, and this is the simile of the bird and the piece of meat. Yeah. And this is the bird that gets hold of a piece of meat. And in the bird realm, piece of meat is very valuable. Usually birds, they have to be happy with insects, yeah, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So if a bird gets a piece of meat, it's yay, piece of meat. It's so happy, gets hold of the piece of meat, flies off. The problem is that that piece of meat exists in the common realm with all other birds, yeah? Because the five sense world is what we have in common with other people. We all live in this world together. We have it in common. The same thing is true for the bird. So as soon as this bird flies off with a piece of meat, other birds, bigger birds, more dangerous birds, hawks, eagles, whatever, they go after it to try to rip that piece of meat out of its beak or out of its claws. Because the bird realm is very violent. Bird realm is really harsh. I don't know if you have seen birds and how they sometimes act with each other. It's terrible. It's really violent and terrible realm. And of course, if that first bird that has the piece of meat, if it doesn't let go of that piece of meat, if the other birds go after it, it will either die or it will suffer terribly as a consequence. So you have to let go of that piece of meat. That is really the only answer in that particular situation. And the Buddha says this is the simile for the five sense realm. The five sense realm is like this, yeah. We are always competing because we live in this realm together. It's a common realm. And so we're competing over the jobs, we're competing over the partners, we're competing over the salary increases, we're competing over getting the license to own a car in Singapore. I know a little bit about Singapore, so that's kind of comes in handy here, right? And so all of these competitions, yeah, and if one person gets it, we don't get it. And this often leads to resentment, and then it leads to conflict, it leads to problems, and ultimately it leads to violence and wars, all of these kind of things. Many of the wars in our societies are wars over resources, like the wars in the Middle East, for example, sometimes are over resources. We want the same thing. The world is built in such a way that it is inherently full of conflict, full of wars, full of all of these issues. It has to be that way. And when we, after the Second World War, everything is very peaceful, we become complacent. We forget the simile of the Buddha. Yeah, we forget it because we never learned it in the first place. That was our mistake, getting reborn in Norway here. That was a bad idea to get reborn in Norway. You had no chance to learn these beautiful similes, yeah, except when you rebelled and you moved to Australia or whatever, and then kind of you get to hear them anyway. So this is kind of really off-putting, yeah. This idea that the realm we are in is inherently like this. It doesn't matter what kind of institutions we put in place. It doesn't matter how good our governments are. Of course, if you have a good government, it's better. If you have good institutions, it's better. But it's never going to be so good that there is no violence and no conflict. Conflict is inherent to that realm. And so once you see that, you want to withdraw from that realm. You want to close your eyes. You want to sit down in meditation. And you want to go to that refuge the Buddha was talking about, the four satipatthanas, where you go inside of yourself. You watch the breath and you find the bliss and meaning inside instead. Yeah, that is kind of the result of that. And what is so beautiful about that, if we can live lives and have a spiritual inclination in this way, then when we go back into the world again, we will become beacons of hope, beacons of peace, people who actually add to that society, reduce conflict, yeah, because we have found a refuge somewhere else. We bring those beautiful qualities back into society again. We don't want to be in conflict anymore, because if we are in conflict in the world, we destroy that inner refuge that we have. We understand that. So we become actually agents of harmony here. But those agents of harmony first need to practice the spiritual path. Then there is a chance of bringing that back into society again. So this is the beauty of the spiritual practice. It is beneficial all around for everyone in this way. So remember the simile of the piece of meat, yeah, the bird. Society is problematic. And we know that from history. There is no such thing as an absolute peace in human society. Okay. So liable to sickness, right? So we have bad health, and let's go on to the next one. What is the advantage of often reviewing this? I am liable to die. I am not exempt from death. There are sentient beings who drunk on the vanity of life. Kind of amazing. The vanity of life is kind of extraordinary, isn't it? You wouldn't think there was such a thing, but there you are. They do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. Reviewing the subject often, they entirely give up the vanity of life, or at least they reduce it. This is the advantage of often reviewing this. I'm liable to die. I am not exempt from death. The vanity of life, the vanity to think that we have some right to live for a certain period, but death can always be around the corner. The idea, the memory, the mindfulness, maranasati is one of the words found in the suttas. It means the mindfulness of death, or the maranasanya, the perception of death. Some of the most important contemplations found in the suttas, very, very useful. And what they do is they remind you of the uncertainty of life, and they clear up your perceptions, remind you what is important, and then make you straighten out the path, and then you practice in the right way. Sometimes it can be useful to do a bit of mindfulness of death at the beginning of your meditation. Yeah, some people talk about thinking a lot. I'm sure many of you have thought a little bit during meditation. I'm sure if it is anyone here who hasn't thought at all during the meditation, it would be a miracle if that was the case. So mindfulness of death can help you to reduce the thinking mind. Yeah, why? Because the future becomes irrelevant if you're going to die. There's no future anymore, and when there's no future, there's not much to think about. Yeah, it's kind of very handy here. So no future, bang, then you go straight into samadhi because you're remembering death. So we can try to do, someone suggested doing some death contemplation for the meditation. We can try to do that and see what happens. Yeah, I'm not going to say that. I was going to say something, but no, I'm not going to say that. Mindfulness arose just in time, so that's good now. So, all right, next one then. What is the advantage of often reviewing this? I must be parted and separated from all I hold dear and beloved. There are sentient beings who, aroused by desire and lust for their dear and beloved, do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. Reviewing this subject often, they entirely give up desire and lust for what is dear and beloved, or at least they reduce it. This is the advantage of often reviewing this. I must be parted and separated from all I hold dear and beloved. So this is another nice contemplation. Everything you hold dear and beloved must be separated from you. Yeah, and again, we find that the simile that is kind of most powerful in this respect in the suttas is the simile that I also often talk about, is the simile of the borrowed goods. Yeah, is anyone who has not heard the simile of the borrowed goods? Everyone heard that simile? You haven't heard the simile? Okay, many of you have probably heard of it before, but it's a beautiful simile. And I think it's worthwhile just mentioning it again, even though many of you have heard it before. And this is the idea that everything in our life is borrowed. Yeah, and how do you think about things that are borrowed compared to things that you own? It's quite different. Let's say that you borrow an apartment for a few weeks compared to owning an apartment. It feels quite different, right? Or if you rent a car compared to owning a car, what is the different feeling from renting a car, from owning a car? You treat things differently if you rent them compared to when you own them. When you own them, you get really upset if someone damages it or does something bad to it. But if you rent it, okay, you shrug your shoulders, not such a big deal. You think about things very differently. And what the Buddha says is that almost everything in our life is really borrowed. And we should think about it as something borrowed rather than something owned. And he gives us the example in the suttas. The simile is of this man who borrows a carriage which is drawn by horses, yeah, and then he has jewelry, so has kind of all kind of jewelry, golden jewelry, whatever, and then he kind of drives around in a carriage with golden jewelry. He drives around town, and then people say, wow, look at that, this is how the wealthy people enjoy their wealth, right? They're driving around with a carriage, and it's a bit hard to kind of compare to the modern day. I guess maybe someone in Singapore driving down with a chauffeur and Rolls Royce or something like that. Are there many Rolls Royces in Singapore? Yeah. Sometimes, occasionally, don't know. Okay, Ferraris, Rolls Royces, I don't know. Anyway, so people he's driving around, and of course that people are pointing to him and they say, look, this is how the wealthy enjoy their wealth. And of course, if when someone says that about you, you start to identify with that wealth because other people point to you, and it starts to become part of your personality. I am a wealthy person. And soon enough, because you identify with that, then when the people who own those things, they take them back again, it feels terrible because now you have identified with these things and everything is taken back. It's as if suddenly your identity is challenged. It is challenged because all the things you identify with are taken away from you. And this is why you see wealthy people, sometimes if they lose all their money, they will commit suicide because of that. Yeah, because their identity is so much invested in their wealth that without the wealth, they feel like nothing. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Isn't it kind of terrible that you're so identified with your money that you commit suicide because when your money is gone? It's kind of crazy. And it's, it means that you haven't understood much about life at all. You're really kind of spiritually very poor if that is what happens. And so this is the problem, yeah, when everything is borrowed in this way. And because we know everything has to go back eventually, everything will be taken from us. then we invest, we think about things in a different way. We don't invest in borrowed goods in the same way that we invest in goods that we own. We don't invest in a borrowed or rented apartment in the same way we invest in an apartment we own. If you're just borrowing an apartment for a few weeks, you don't spend lots of money making it up because you know you're going to have to give it up very soon. And so we think about our life in that way. Yeah, things in our life are borrowed. Our relationships are borrowed. The people in our life are borrowed. The things that we think we own, we don't actually own, we are borrowed. Our status in this world is borrowed. Ultimately, our body is borrowed. It has to go back to nature eventually. And so you think about these things as borrowed goods. Yeah, this is kind of the critical thing. And then it changes your attitude. And then instead of investing too much time in the borrowed goods, we invest the time and the money and the resources in things that are not borrowed. What are the things that are not borrowed? That is what comes up next. So let's have a look at what is not borrowed. What is the advantage of often reviewing like this? I am the owner of my deeds, the heir to my deeds. Deeds are my womb, my relative, and my refuge. I shall be the heir of whatever deeds I do, whether good or bad. There are sentient beings who do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. Reviewing this subject often, they entirely give up bad conduct, or at least reduce it. This is the advantage for a woman or man, a lay person or renunciate, who often reviews like this. I am the owner of my deeds and the heir to my deeds. Deeds are my womb, my relative, and my refuge. I shall be the heir of whatever deeds I do, whether good or bad. So if we are the owner of anything, it is our karma. Deeds here is the word karma. Yeah, that is what we take with us into the future. That is the one thing that is not borrowed, but that you actually own and that you take with you. And of course, if we're going to invest again in anything, invest in what you own. Invest in what you take with you. Life is a very short thing. Yeah, things will all have to go. Invest in your karma instead. So start living in a different way. Live for the long term rather than for the short term. Yeah, invest for the long term instead of investing for the short term. What does that mean? And it's very simple. It means just living with more care, more compassion, more understanding, living with right speech, thinking in the right way, understanding that this is what really matters. Even life and death is not so important because life and death is often the transition from one life to the next one. And after we make the transition, we can carry on living well or badly if we choose to do so, but ideally living well, yeah? And then you carry on with these things. That is where we invest for the long term. These are the things that we own. These are the things that really matter. And once you understand that, your attitude to life changes. So it's a beautiful simile about what really matters in life, what really is for our long-term benefit. And yeah, does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. So allow it to sink in and make more and more sense over time until it makes so much sense that you never forget it. It's always carried with you there, and you always do the right thing as a consequence. So these are some of the beautiful similes that the Buddha uses, the simile of the borrowed goods. There's another nice simile that also comes from the Patanjali Sutta, which I could mention now. This is the simile of the dream. Yeah. And the Buddha says at night you dream about all kinds of beautiful things, beautiful meadows, beautiful towns, beautiful forests, beautiful little rivers and villages. And then you wake up in the morning and it's all gone because it was a dream, it wasn't reality. And the Buddha then compares the sensory world to a dream. And this is kind of interesting because often we are taught, this is kind of a Buddhist idea that life is really like a dream. Yeah, everything is a dream. But in the suttas, the Buddha really, the only dream there is the five sense realm. That is the dream. Yeah, so we have this idea, we dream about all of these things, especially we dream about the future. We have an idea what the future is going to be like. And the future never turns out like the dream. In the dream, everything is perfect. In the dream, we get this beautiful house, we have a nice relationship, we have a nice job, yeah, and everything is kind of rosy. Yeah. And then it stops. One of those amazing things about dreams, you'll notice, okay, so you want to get into a relationship with a person, and then the dream usually ends at the point when you get into the relationship. Have you noticed that? Yeah, when you think about a person, oh, this person, they're really nice, I'd like to get into a relationship with them, and you fantasize about it, and the fantasy kind of goes to the point when you kind of, the relationship begins, and then maybe you do a few things together. But it kind of stops there. And this is one of those beautiful exercises that Ajahn Brahmali taught us when I was a young monk. Yeah, he doesn't say this anymore, but he used to say this. And it's a beautiful little thing to do. It's a very simple idea. It's the "and then what" meditation. The "and then what" meditation is not found in the suttas. This is an Ajahn Brahmali meditation. And it is the question, and then what? So you get into the relationship with this person. And then what? And then, okay, then we go to the movies together. And then what? Then you have to come back, and then you come back home. And then what? You have to do the dishwashing. And then what? Maybe you have an argument, yeah, because you're not perfect. So you have an argument about something. And then what? And then what? And then what? Then you die eventually. Someone has to die, right? This is the nature of things, or the relationship breaks up. And if you ask the "and then what" question again and again and again, it breaks the spell, the delusion of what actually is going on. Yeah, reality comes back because everything really ends with death. That is where it always ends. Every time we attach, that attachment has to be broken up because that is the nature of things. So always ask yourself the "and then what." I remember Ajahn Brahmali is always good at making these examples really strong and really clear. So he said it's like you're watching the cowboy movies, yeah, the Western movies, and kind of at the end of the movie, the hero gets his girl and they kind of ride off into the sunset, right? And it's all very glorious and beautiful. Then Ajahn Brahmali says, well, then think, and then what? That kind of destroys the whole thing, right? Because and then what? They ride off into the sunset, they get back home, and then ordinary life begins, right? You can't keep on riding into the sunset forever, it doesn't make any sense. And so then you kind of go back, you do the dishes, and things are really ordinary and really kind of not so interesting anymore now. This is the reality of life, yeah? You fall in love with someone, how long does it last? And then after a while, it becomes very ordinary here. Yeah, okay, then you are good friends or whatever, that's also okay, but it's not always glorious and wonderful or whatever. Eventually you have to die. If it's a really good relationship, you have to die. Most relationships are not great, yeah? And then death may be something good. No, I'm being very naughty now. This is kind of the monk's view of relationships. So we have to kind of have that view of relationships, but otherwise monk's life doesn't work out. But it is true, right? It's not wrong. That is kind of the point. So, and then what is a very useful thing? It breaks the dream. The reality, the five sense world is a dream. You have an idea of where you want to be. When you are young, when I remember when I was at university, I had an idea what kind of person I was going to be, have this kind of job. Yeah, you have this kind of broad idea of life, what it's going to be like. Of course, it turns out completely different. It turns out like this, right? I had never thought I was going to become a monk. Yeah, that's the last thing I thought, but actually that's kind of how you end up. So things are always very different from what you think. Yeah. This is the idea of the dream. Don't buy into that dream. Craving always lies to you. Craving tells you it will be like this. When you get that apartment, you will be happy, right? Craving always lies. You're never really happy. There's just more craving after that one. That brings me to another simile, the simile of the dog and the bone. You know that simile? There's another simile of the famous similes of the Buddha. Should I tell that simile? Yes? Okay. It's a beautiful simile. This is the first simile in the Portalia Sutta. All of these similes are found in Majjhima Nikaya 54, the middle length saying 54. And this is a simile of the dog and the bone, right? And the simile goes as follows. There is a dog, and dogs, they like to eat meat and nice food. And so the dog goes to the butcher shop and it hangs out outside the butcher shop, looking into the window, trying to look very cute. Yeah, because if you look cute, there's more chances the butcher will kind of throw you some meat or whatever. But butchers, especially butchers in India, they are very mean and stingy, right? Because this simile is from India. And so the butcher, there's no way it's going to give away any meat because the meat can be sold. So it scrapes the bone completely clean, and all that is left is the bone, and it has a bit of blood on the bone. And then it thinks, okay, I can throw the bone to the dog. Yeah, dogs like bones. But chucks out the bone to the dog. Yeah. And of course, the dog is hungry here. The dog wants something sustaining here. You don't get anything sustaining by gnawing on the bone, right? All you get is the taste of the blood, which makes you even more craving, makes you even more hungry, right? You kind of get even more desperate, but there's no real sustenance in that bone. And so the craving gets even stronger. And then the dog gets desperate, runs off to the next butcher shop, tries to look cute outside the window. Yeah, trying to be cute. I can't really do the cute dog, but anyway. Tries to look very cute. And of course, the next butcher, just as stingy. In India, every butcher is stingy. It's kind of otherwise the simply doesn't work. That's why the butchers are all stingy. Another bone, right? Still no sustenance. Craving building up again because the taste of the blood is there, but no real sustenance. It runs off to the next butcher shop, and on it goes, butcher shop after butcher shop, until the dog dies. Isn't that kind of a terrible fate? Yeah, running, never being satisfied, on and on and on, until you die. It's kind of completely pointless. Completely purposeless. It's all just suffering from one end to the other one. And then when the dog dies, what happens next? It gets reborn as a little puppy. Mother takes it to the butcher shop. And it starts from scratch, back to the butcher shop again, right? Learns from his mother how to go to the butcher shop, how to get bones with blood, but no real sustenance. And then on, dies again, back to becoming a puppy, and on the cycle goes. And it's kind of despairing when you hear that. It sounds terrible. It sounds absolutely awful. But the Buddha says this is what the five sense realm is like. There is no real satisfaction in the five sense realm. We have this idea that when we go to the butcher shop, when we go out into the world and try to build up money, relationships, belongings, we have this idea we will be satisfied. But all we ever get is the bone with a bit of blood on it. It never really satisfies. The five sense realm is never satisfying. And the reason why it is not satisfying is because the problem is actually a psychological problem. We are not fulfilled within. And how can you fulfill that psychological hole, that psychological incompleteness? How can you fulfill that with external things? It's impossible because it's an inner problem and we try to fill it with external things. All that is a bit of blood, and then the craving gets stronger. You go from one relationship to the next one thing to the next one. It never really satisfies. Dream about the beautiful home. And then when eventually you get that home, it doesn't take that long before it starts falling apart and it wasn't so great after all. Then you start dreaming of the next home. And on it goes without satisfaction. And then finally you come to your deathbed. Are you satisfied on your deathbed? No, still not satisfied. Yeah, and then you die, you get reborn, and you do the same thing again, chasing after new relationships, new things, thinking that what you're doing is meaningful, when actually there is no purpose to it at all. Die, reborn, doing the same thing over and over and over. Every life, it feels meaningful. Every life, it feels that you're living for a purpose, but actually it turns out to be empty. So what is the alternative? And the alternative is very simple. The alternative is that we need to do something with the inner psychological problem. So if we are not content, if we are not psychologically satisfied, how can we do that? And the way to do that, instead of fulfilling it with external things, which by definition are always going to be external, we need to work directly with our psyche, with our psychology. This is what the spiritual path is. This is why the Buddha talks about the spiritual path being mental development, chitta bhavana, which means development of the mind. And as you develop the mind by living well, by being generous, by being kind, you find another kind of happiness. And the happiness that you find from living well is a very different kind of happiness from the external happiness. It is a happiness that does not have any craving with it. It's a happiness that makes you peaceful. And that is why people have been asking how to make the meditation work better. This is why ideally what we want to do in meditation is to be able to reflect on the things that we have done in our life that are good, that led to that kind of spiritual happiness. Bring that into your meditation, because that is a peaceful kind of happiness that allows the mind to become peaceful. That is why this kind of recollection works. And that's why meditation becomes possible, by recollecting your sila, recollecting your chaga, and all of these kind of things. So this is a different kind of happiness. It is one that is actually satisfying. And then you bring that into your meditation. And as you meditate, you deepen that sense of contentment and satisfaction more and more and more, until one day all the craving is gone, all the desire has disappeared. And when all the desire has disappeared, that means you feel perfect contentment. That is like discovering the meaning of life. Yeah? Why is that? Well, because desire is always about moving us on somewhere, trying to find a solution, trying to find the end of that desire. Desire is really about finding the end of itself. That is what it's about. Craving is about finding the end of craving, right? So if you can find the end of craving and desire, you've actually found the answer to the meaning of life itself. And at that moment, when you are in a beautiful, deep state of meditation, experiencing bliss, experiencing contentment, no desire, no drive to do anything in the whole world. At that moment, it feels like you have achieved the meaning of life. Why? Because there's nothing more to be done. You feel like you could sit here forever because there's nothing more to be done. That is, by definition, discovering the meaning of life. So this is the simile of the dog. Yeah, it's on the one hand, it's kind of despairing simile when you kind of think about your life like that. But on the other hand, it points in the right direction to what is truly meaningful and what truly makes sense in this existence of ours. So, what do you think?
Depressing.
Sorry?
Depressing.
Interesting?
Depressing.
Depressing, right? Okay, we need to practice more meditation, you talk. That's where then it gets depressing to becomes what's the opposite of depressing? The exhilarating, okay, positive, whatever it is. Anyway, so that is the idea. So these are there for your reflection. They're not there to make you depressed. And if you reflect on them in the right way, they will actually give rise to some sort of movement towards the spiritual path, and then become a positive contribution in your life rather than a negative detraction or whatever. So these are some of those similes. Okay. Let's look at the last part of this sutta. So we have looked at the 5 contemplations. Now comes the conclusion. Yeah, what happens when you do this fully? Then that noble disciple reflects. It is not just me who is liable to grow old, not being exempt from old age. For all sentient beings grow old according to their nature. As long as they come and go, pass away, and are reborn. When they review this subject often, the path is born in them. They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. So here the idea is that however you get reborn, yeah, it doesn't matter where you get reborn, whatever life kind of life you have, this is always going to be true, regardless. There is no corner of samsara where you don't grow old. All parts of samsara have this kind of nature to them. And so you gain kind of this universal insight into the nature of existence. It is not just your life, it is whatever life you find, it is always going to have this nature. And this is like an insight into the universal nature of life, yeah, of existence itself. And when you gain that kind of universal understanding of things, then this interesting thing happens. Yeah, the path is born in them. And what that means, it means that you become a stream enterer. It means that you see, you understand the Dhamma deeply, and you understand basically the teaching of the Buddha. That is what that is about, the path being born in them. And this is kind of fascinating, isn't it? It's sort of, again, the idea of what seemed like a very simple contemplation, just the contemplation of growing old, and that is enough for you to become a stream enterer. That's kind of interesting. How can that be the case? And the answer is that, first of all, you need to contemplate this very deeply. And of course, as you contemplate this deeply, because this is the very first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, this is about right view, then the path starts to take hold. From that right view comes the right intention. And then the whole path unfolds on this foundation of that particular reflection. And when you contemplate it deeply, you actually give up all the negative qualities of the mind that enables the meditation to happen. Then you achieve deep samadhi, and based on that deep samadhi, you get the Yata Bhuta Jnanadasana, which is the knowledge and vision of reality, of things as they actually are. So this is how that right view at the beginning of the path leads to all of these kind of positive consequences. That's kind of fascinating, isn't it? It shows you again the potential of simple contemplations taken to their completion or the culmination. This is kind of the consequences of that, seeing things according to reality. And that, of course, is the insight of the stream enterer. And then they cultivate and develop and make much of that path. So you come to the path is born in you. In a sense, what that means, that the path is born in you, it means that the Noble Eightfold Path becomes part of you. It becomes part of your psychology. It means that, the stream enterer are said to be perfected in conduct, sila sampanno, or sila paripuri, which means that they are perfect in their conduct, in their sila, in their virtue. That is kind of, because you know the Dhamma, you can no longer go wrong. This is like what I was mentioning the other day about crossing the street. You become so careful every time you do something that you do things in the right way, because you understand the danger of doing bad things. So the path is inside of you. The factors, the mindfulness, the right view, everything is part of your psychology. And that is one of the consequences of being a stream enterer, is that you can meditate very easily. You can enter into samadhi easily, because you understand where happiness is to be found and where suffering is to be found. And because you understand that, you just let go of the suffering and you stay with the happiness instead, and you attain samadhi as a consequence. This is one of the ways you can know if you are a stream enterer. You go into jhanas, bang, like that. Okay, it must be stream enterer in that case. Maybe not like that, but you know what I mean, fairly easily. If nothing is ever like that, that's not how life works. But at least when you kind of have a bit of time for yourself and to chillax, then you can go into samadhi. So you cultivate that path which is born inside of you, and as you do so, you give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. Fetters, fetter is like a tie, it's like a rope, it's something that binds you, it holds you down, and it binds you to existence. That is the problem of the fetters. It binds you to suffering. That's really what it kind of culminates in. So giving up the fetters means that you untie the shackles and you get freed from prison. And instead of just painting your prison walls inside, you actually get out of prison altogether. And that is what eliminating the fetters is all about. And you eliminate the underlying tendencies, which means that there is no more coming back, because it is the underlying tendencies that make these defilements and problems return again and again. This comes from the contemplation of old age. It's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? So, let's just read through the rest of the sutta. We can do it fairly quickly now, probably, because it's just more of the same, really. It is not just me who is liable to get sick, not being exempt from sickness. All sentient beings get sick according to their nature. As long as they come and go, pass away and are reborn. When they review this subject often, the path is born in them. They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. It is according to the nature, as long as they come and go, pass away, and are reborn. The idea that it's only as long as you are subject to rebirth that these things are a problem. This is why rebirth is right there at the very beginning. Rebirth is the start of all of this. And as long as you are subject to that, then this is a problem. Eliminate rebirth, and you eliminate the problem of sickness, kind of obviously. And it shows you again why rebirth is such an important part of this second noble truth, and the idea of suffering in Buddhism. There's an interesting there, you have the idea of come and go, pass away, and being reborn. Is there a difference between these things, between coming and going and passing away and being reborn? Maybe there is a difference. And what might that difference be? And the difference might be related to the idea of the intermediate state. You come and go from this state to the intermediate state, whereas rebirth is more like being reborn according to your karma into a future life. But the intermediate state is an interesting little thing in Buddhism. And it seems like the Buddha, he taught the intermediate state. We just talked about this very briefly at the conference that we had just last weekend. And this is called the Antarabhava in the commentaries. And it fits kind of when you hear about near-death experiences. You hear about people going into some kind of intermediate existence. Maybe they have a life review, and sometimes they may meet some relatives and these kind of things. And then they often come to kind of a boundary here, and they have to decide if they go beyond that boundary, there's no returning. And sometimes they are told, oh, you have to go back again. That seems to be the intermediate time when you kind of get to kind of look at the heavenly realm and maybe sometimes the bad realms to give you a bit of a fright, and then kind of you come back again to life afterwards, and then you carry on again. That seems to fit with how people have this intermediate, these experiences of near-death experiences. And this might be what is going on here. And this is a bit contrary to Theravada Buddhism. This is what you find in the suttas, but you don't really find in Theravada. Theravada is more like one life follows the other one immediately. You have the Abhidhamma ideas of Chuti Chitta and the Patisandhi Vijnana. Chuti Chitta is the last moment in one life. Patisandhi Vijnana is the rebirth linking consciousness that immediately gives rise to rebirth. And this is fascinating because it means that, what is our identity as Buddhists? Are we Theravada Buddhists, or are we disciples of the Buddha? And I would say that what we should be is disciples of the Buddha. The Buddha is the one who gave these teachings. And if Theravada Buddhism is in accordance with the teaching of the Buddha, then it's fine. But sometimes it may not be in accordance. This is kind of fascinating. And this may be one of these cases where it's not quite in accordance with the way the Buddha was teaching. And sometimes it has interesting implications. Yeah, just to give you, I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, but that's okay. I'm just kind of random babbling along with various things. That's kind of good fun there. And sometimes it has interesting implications. One of the things that Theravada Buddhism makes much of is the idea of the death moment, right? Death moment, you have to have the right mind state, because that mind state will determine where you get reborn. And you can see why, because if one mind moment is the previous life, the next moment is your next life, then obviously the last mind moment is going to be really important. Yeah. And this is where you get this idea on your deathbed. You really have to think the right thought. Yeah. Don't have an ill will. Think kind thoughts. Have metta. Now was your chance to get reborn in a good space. And of course, as soon as someone says don't have ill will, it's like saying don't think of an elephant, and straight away you think of the elephant, right? It's impossible. So the pressure is really on, right? And it's kind of terrible. You are dying. You just want to be peaceful, and you have all this pressure on you to think the right thing. That's bad, yeah? And this is why it is actually good news that there is an intermediate state there, because it means that the whole pressure of thinking the right thing in the last moment, actually, it is not really like that. You have the intermediate state, then you have the life review. You kind of review your whole life. And if you have been a good person, you can say, yay, I've done well. And you feel good about yourself. And then bang, you go to the Devaloka, right? If you've been a bit of a dodgy character, it has the opposite effect. So be careful about being a dodgy character. Yeah, and you have that life review, and you can see how things kind of work out much more nicely in that way. And it means you can relax on your deathbed, and you can just go with the flow and enjoy the dying process instead of being stressed out by having to think. Don't think about that elephant, right? And straight away you're thinking about it. So it changes actually our outlook quite a bit. It takes away the significance of the death moment, and it changes the way we think about the dying process. So sometimes these things that may seem like they haven't got much significance actually turns out that actually they are significant after all. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Do you agree that's interesting? No, maybe not? Okay, whatever. I find it interesting. So whatever, as they say. Does that make sense to you when I was saying this now? Does it kind of, yeah? Okay, good. Okay, so let's look at the last few examples here. The same thing again, yes, very repetitive. It is not just me who is liable to die, not being exempt from death. For all sentient beings die according to the nature, so long as they come and go, pass away, and are reborn. If you do not get reborn, you don't die. There's no re-death if you don't get reborn. When they review the subject, often the path is born in them. Not reborn, this time it's only born. Is the difference there? They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. It is not just me who must be parted and separated from all I hold dear and beloved. For all sentient beings must be parted and separated from all they hold dear and beloved, as long as they come and go and pass away and are reborn. When they review this subject often, the path is born in them. They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. So in all of these cases, you kind of make a universal understanding, yeah? Every being, everyone is subject to these things. And at that moment, you understand that there is no escape. That's kind of the point of this. There is no escape from this kind of suffering in samsaric existence. That is kind of the idea behind this. It is not just me who shall be the owner of my deeds and the heir to my deeds. For all sentient beings shall be the owners of their deeds and heir to their deeds, as long as they come and go, pass away, and are reborn. When they review this subject often, the path is born in them. They cultivate, develop, and make much of it. By doing so, they give up the fetters and eliminate the underlying tendencies. There you are. This is this beautiful sutta on the subjects for regular reviewing. What do you think about this? It's good, yeah? Makes sense, yeah? Anything that does not make sense in this sutta? Everything makes sense. Anything I have forgotten to say that I should say here? What have I forgotten to say here? I just found it so, what I find so interesting about some of these things is how simple ideas can be very, very powerful. Yeah, and how often I think one of the main mistakes, one of the big mistakes we do in Buddhism and the Dhamma is we make it too complicated, we make it too difficult. We go to university, we learn academically what the Dhamma is about. Someone asked a question yesterday about, should I study Buddhism? Should I get a degree in Buddhism? Should I have a PhD or a master in Buddhist studies? And the problem is that very often the things that you will learn are not necessarily all that practical. Yeah, people learn about Abhidhamma, they learn about the number of mind jhavana chittas in the mind moment, the 17 kind of moments in the in one mind sequence or whatever. And they get really excited about the Abhidhamma because they think the Abhidhamma is the higher Dhamma. And if you learn the Abhidhamma, you're learning the ultimate truth, whereas the suttas are only the preliminary truth. And of course, it is the other way around. The Abhidhamma is not even the preliminary truth, whereas the suttas, that is where you find the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is very simple. The ultimate truth is about contemplating the ordinary realities of life in an ordinary way. That is where real insight comes. That is so fascinating. It means that everyone is capable of understanding the Dhamma in a profound way here. And this is our human nature. Yeah, we tend to kind of like the scholastic things because the Abhidhamma is more about learning. Okay, there's 36 kind of aspects of matter. There's 96 kind of mind, different chittas, right? And they integrate in this way, all of these kind of things. And then you kind of learn the ultimate truth. No, you don't learn the ultimate truth. What you learn is just philosophy. You learn someone who's built up a kind of system. The Buddha did not teach the Abhidhamma. And that is a very significant and important point. The Dhamma is simple. The Dhamma is down to earth. The Dhamma, the hard thing of the Dhamma is not understanding what is going on. The hard thing of the Dhamma is actually implementing it. Yeah, the idea of being kind, the idea of being compassionate, never forgetting these things, taking it with you into your life and practicing all the time. That is the hard part of the Dhamma. The ideas are fairly simple there, but the ideas are very powerful there. If you remember every day that you are heading towards old age, if you remember every day that you can die at any time, it is uncertain. That is where your ability to live well comes from. This is the right view that enables this path to work. Simple but powerful things. It's a matter of putting them into practice. That is really the hard part. Yeah, so please put it into practice. Don't forget these things. One of the nice things that we find in the sutta, there's a sutta in the Anguttara Threes. And in that sutta, it talks about 3 kinds of wisdom. And one, now I can't remember all the 3, but one of the kinds of wisdom in there is called the lap wisdom. Yeah, I've talked about this before sometimes, but the lap wisdom is like someone is sitting down and they have all of these things in their lap, kind of grains and various kind of things. And then they get up mindlessly, without mindfulness, all the things they have in the lap just get scattered out. Yeah. And the Buddha says in the same way, there are some people that they listen to the Dhamma talks. Actually, first of all, someone don't even listen to the Dhamma talk. They're just present. They're there. No one knows why they're there, but they're there. Yeah, they're not even listening to the Dhamma talk. Some people are like that. Yeah, very scattered or whatever. Then there are those people who do listen to the Dhamma talk, but as soon as the Dhamma talk is finished, they kind of get up and walk off and start talking about other things. That's the lap wisdom. They scatter all the things that they have in the lap. And then there is the person who, after the Dhamma talk is finished, they keep the ideas in mind. They reflect on them. They take them back and use them in their life to enable them to live better. This is the kind of person we should ideally be. Of course, sometimes we do forget. That's just the way things are. But we should try to remember some of these teachings. And sometimes these very simple teachings are the most powerful ones. I'm going to die. What does that mean for my practice? Yeah, simple little things like that. So this is the job of each one of us. This is my job in my life as well, to remember these teachings at all time, so that actually I follow these teachings in the right way. Then you're doing it, what the Buddha is asking us to do. So reflect on these things. What do they mean in your life? What do they mean when you come back to Singapore later on, in your daily life, in your interaction with the people at work, with your family members, with your friends, with the people at the BF, with whoever it is? What does it actually mean? How can I change? And the moment you start to think, how can I do things better? That is when your meditation starts to come together. Some of you are complaining about your meditation stagnating. And very often the reason why the meditation is stagnating is because there are things in your daily life you haven't resolved yet. Things you can do better. You can act with more kindness. You can act with more understanding and compassion. You can be more generous. Make everything you do in your life an act of generosity. Every time you open your mouth, how can those words that you speak to another person be an act of kindness that uplifts the other person, makes them feel more happy? Isn't that a beautiful way we have the opportunity every time we open our mouth to give a gift to someone else? By speaking with gentleness, with care, with kindness, with understanding. Yeah, there's something very beautiful there. Don't speak too much, but speak, think, reflect before every time you say something. And then you become a blessing for yourself and also for other people, of course. This is how we bring these teachings back into life. And then next time you come on the retreat, because you have really tried really hard, well, not hard, you have tried to have right view as you go about your ordinary life. Come back to meditation, and suddenly it starts to bite. Something really works, and it's different from last year. So the Dhamma takes a lot of commitment, for really making it work out. It is a really it's a path that really takes everything in our life. If you really want to make it work, and of course that is the whole point, because it is about the meaning of life, it is worthwhile really making it work. And so you commit properly, you persevere, you look for your weaknesses, you try to understand why it doesn't work out, and you uncover those beautiful jewels in your life. What are those jewels? They are the little flaws in your conduct. Beautiful verse in the Dhammapada where the Buddha says that when someone points out a flaw in your conduct, you should see it as someone pointing out a jewel, a gem. Why? Because it allows you to make progress. And that progress is the most important thing in our life. So when someone points out a flaw, not a kind of a make-believe flaw, not a false, but a real flaw in your conduct, it opens up new avenues for the practice of the Dhamma. That doesn't mean that we take all criticism on board. Most criticism that we get is nonsense. People criticize because they're having a bad day or whatever. Okay, so we forgive them, we have compassion for them, but we don't take it personally. But occasionally, someone will criticize you in a nice way. Occasionally I would go to Ajahn Brahmali, and I would say to Ajahn Brahmali, Ajahn, if you were to give me some advice about my actions or conduct or whatever, what would you say here? I do that. I try to do that once a year at least. You have to see what he says. And I do that sometimes to other people as well. And it's kind of interesting to hear, right? And what people tell you. And what does Ajahn Brahm say to me? Interesting, right? So this is kind of interesting. So he says kind of things that you don't really expect. Yeah, things that because Ajahn Brahm is not kind of a very conventional person. So he tells you things that you don't expect to hear. And he says things like, what does he say? He sometimes, most of the time, he doesn't say anything because there isn't all that much to be said, probably. Or he might say, stay more at Bodhinyana Monastery. Don't travel so often to Singapore. But these are the kind of things he might say. Don't travel so much. Yeah, stay more put. These are the kind of little things. And I take that as a sign that my conduct is reasonably good. Otherwise, he might say something more serious. So these are the things we open ourselves up for admonishment, yeah, for correction in this way. And that can be very powerful, very beautiful, especially if you trust the person. The beautiful thing with Ajahn Brahm, I trust him to a very, very high degree. And when I ask him these questions, I'm being sincere, and I know that whatever he says to me will be for my own benefit. Yeah, so I know that already beforehand. The way he speaks to you is always with kindness and compassion, so you know it's coming from a good place. So in this way, we grow in the Dhamma. You start to gain more insight into your character. You change gradually over time, and as you change, you look out for the new flaws, yeah, and you grow and grow and grow, gradually eliminating the bad aspects of your character and your conduct. It's a beautiful path, and every step you take, every time you grow, every time you eliminate a flaw, you feel more bright, you feel more happy, you feel more content, yeah, because these things are what block your happiness in life. And you start to see this beautiful path emerging. The path is actually inside of you. The path is reflected in your mind. Your mind is becoming more bright, more beautiful, more wholesome, more good qualities, less bad ones. And you feel gradually uplifted as a person. This is what I was talking about yesterday. We see the path going up, yeah, a little bit like this, but the trend is upwards. That is kind of the nice thing about this path. And when you see that, you feel that you are on this journey on something really beautiful, really powerful, heading somewhere that is really, really worthwhile. Most of life is this up and down journey, not going anywhere, roaming around in samsara, enjoying this, enjoying that, one relationship after the other, not really having any great success, and any successful maybe, but then having to die, and everything has to be let go. Here, finally doing something meaningful, you can feel real change in your life. And what a wonderful and remarkable and amazing and splendid thing that is when that happens. Yeah, can't really have enough adjectives to explain that. So this is the path for you. This is the practice that we have to do. And it starts with these beautiful, simple teachings. These are the teachings that the Buddha to be used to reach awakening. And these are the things we too can use to reach awakening. And this is what this sutta is about. So I'm going to stop there. And so keep on enjoying yourself. Have a good time. Have a nice cup of tea. And we'll see you back again at 7:30 later on.